What is up, and welcome to another edition of the Bruin Bible. Will Decker, your host. Make sure you guys are liking and subscribing the podcast. We are brought to you guys today by our advertisers. Our advertisers are Bell to Bell Fitness, Shea Tor, a realtor out in Arizona, former Bruin alum, and my main man Howard Chang, a realtor right here in Los Angeles. Let's go through them, guys. Bell to Bell Fitness is a boxing gym on the West Coast used by their FIT acronym, Fight Inspired Training. My main man, Tony Gonzalez, was the boxing coach for UCLA for over 10 years. He has built this gym on the West Side to learn how to boxing, stay in shape, and get you all the essentials you need to become somebody that is obsessed with boxing and fitness. Make sure to check it out. Go into Bell to Bell Fitness and say you heard about it from the Bruin Bible, and you're going to get a free session with Tony Gonzalez. So make sure to check that out. Shea Tor, my main man. Shea Tor is a licensed real estate agent in Arizona and a lifelong Bruin. He's a current Wooden Athletic Fund donor and football season ticket holder. When not selling houses or going to UCLA games, he loves to travel the country, checking out different arenas, ballparks, and stadiums. If you're looking to make the move to Arizona or know someone who is, please reach out to our loyal friend, Mr. Shea Tor. His phone number is 602-487-3975. Once again, his number is 602-487-3975. Make sure to check that out. And then the local realtor we got out here, Howard Chang. Howard Chang is a local realtor with the Serene team at eXp Realty. Their team has an office right here in Culver City, though they help clients buy and sell homes all over the LA County and the surrounding areas. Howard and his team do a ton of business and are super in tune with the market, knowing winning strategies to give their clients a competitive advantage. Have amazing vendor referrals, are a one-stop shop for anything real estate, and just provide a ton of value for their clients. Howard and his partner, Kyle Draper, are UCLA alums and a huge fans of the UCLA football and basketball programs. You will often see them at games, tailgating and networking, and staying involved with the UCLA alumni community. They would love to help any fellow alumni with accomplishing their real estate goals. So if you guys have any real estate needs in the LA area, look no further. Howard is your guy. All right, guys, we're going to go into the episode. What is up, guys, and welcome out to the latest edition of the Bruin Bible. This one is going to be pretty extensive. It's going to be fun. We're talking basketball for the first time for this upcoming season, man. We are going to be breaking down how UCLA is looking in the preseason polls, what we think the lineup's going to shake out to. There's a lot of credible players that are going to be fighting for playing time with this roster, and ultimately how we see UCLA kind of putting themselves back in the landscape for potential title coming back to UCLA, the first one since the mid-90s. We got a lot of great stuff. We're going to break down the Rutgers preview. Rutgers, surprisingly, a decent team right now. They are one win away from getting bowl eligibility this week against UCLA. But, Madman, the place I want to start at when it comes to UCLA and what they've brought to the table is the brand new NIL that we just actually got. Champion of Westwood, we've actually put in the stream description a link where you guys can donate if you guys feel so inclined to do so. But Champion of Westwood, this is really cool, man. And I'm going off of Maddie Walsh's tweet where she kind of gave the spark notes to people that haven't, read the whole details about it. They hired a chief revenue officer for the first time when it came to NIL. They hired a chief development officer. They restructured the entire collective. You could donate to football. If you just want to donate to football, you can donate to basketball if you want to do that. And you could also donate to individual women's and, other sports within the UCLA, umbrella, if you will. There's just a lot of things. They changed the development policies to acknowledge NIL collective and donations. I thought it was much needed, and to kind of have a governing body where we can oversee where this NIL money comes in and goes out, I think is really cool to see, as college football desperately needed it. UCLA is kind of getting to that next step and going ahead of it. What was your, initial thoughts when you saw the article come out of Champion of Westwood, and how do you think this will impact not only football but basketball moving forward?
Yeah, Will, it's a great question. A great day. It's a great day to be a UCLA fan because I think some of these moves, and I'll just talk sort of holistically before getting into the details, these moves, Will, are more than anything a philosophical acknowledgement of the importance of NIL to the lifeblood of any major college sport moving forward. And I think that has now become a unanimous sentiment within the UCLA Bruins ecosystem in a way that wasn't unanimous even as recently as 3 or 6 months ago. I think there was still a segment of the UCLA booster population of UCLA donors, givers, supporters, leaning a little bit sort of older generation that didn't actually believe that NIL was something that should be done. And I think because of that, I think UCLA had to be a little bit more cautious and had to sort of slow roll some policies, that amongst other things as well. But now getting this sort of reorganization, this revised vision, I think has sort of created a scenario where everyone is acknowledging that this is the new way of college sports, and you have to have NIL at the centerpiece of any sort of strategy if you want to be competitive in a serious way at a national level in any possible sport. So that, to me, philosophically, is why I'm really excited, because this athletic department would not have been able to make this organizational structural changes if they didn't get a sense that their greatest boosters, their most passionate alumni, their biggest givers were not going to be behind this and provide support. So really great day there. And Will, I think at a more tactical level in terms of details, we went from Men of Westwood. Men of Westwood was sort of the overarching NIL collective for UCLA the past couple of years. But I think there was sort of an acknowledgement that perhaps they were stretched a little too thin, because having one overarching NIL collective to cover football as well as men's basketball, women's basketball, all of the other Olympic sports, you were in a situation where you had a finite amount of resources and they were stretched very thin. Now what is being taken place here is you have three fundamental structures. You have Men of Westwood, you have Champions of Westwood, and then you have got Bruins for life. And so Men of Westwood now becomes exclusively men's basketball. So you're sort of dedicating resources to your flagship sport in a very focused and intentional manner. Champions of Westwood is everything that are the Olympic sports, women's basketball, basically everything else. And Bruins for Life now is the dedicated NIL collective just for football. And I think it's such the right move, because I think there's an acknowledgement that to be competitive in football even requires an order of magnitude of resources and time and investment that's even greater than basketball. Because, Will, it sort of makes sense, right? You've got 80 plus players on a football team. You've only got 12 to 15 players on a basketball team. I mean, you're talking about 5x, 6x the difference in number of players. So you probably need 5x, 6x the number of investment and time and people and energy and resources and so forth. So having Men of Westwood now just double click on basketball, Bruins for Life now just on football, and now Champions of Westwood for everything else, it's such a clean strategy. And also very excited, Will, about the new CEO/executive director of Bruins for Life, which is James Washington, a UCLA great in the Donahue years, multiple-time Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys. On the defensive side of the ball, as Troy Aikman, another fellow Bruin, was quarterbacking that dynastic run. So kind of the ideal person to really sort of oversee this particular collective, because I think James Washington is in the unique position to be able to cross over multiple eras, multiple generations and age groups. He can tap into the folks that were at UCLA in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, because he was part of the heyday of the Donahue era, right in the heart of it. And he's young enough to be able to sort of appease and relate to the athletes of the 90s and the 2000s and the 2010s and so on. So I love the executive director in James Washington there. And I think the sky is the limit moving forward. As you mentioned, Will, off air, and what's kind of been shared, is already $1 million raised for, this collective, which is very, very exciting. It shows that, folks are serious and they believe that this is the lifeblood. And I think if there was a silver lining, Will, to starting the season 1-5, it's an acknowledgement of our entire ecosystem that, this can't happen without NIL. Like, something has to sort of fundamentally change if we want to be remain a power in basketball and get to our potential in football. It just cannot happen without investment. And then the last point, Will, I'll make before handing it back over to you. I think the chief revenue officer is such a wonderful position, very forward thinking of the athletic department and the university, because we'll get into this more in the offseason as it gets closer. But July 1st, 2025 is a very significant date in college sports, because that is the expected passage date of legislation where players, student athletes, are going to be allowed to be paid by the university. And there's a conversation right now that up to $20 million of an athletic department's budget can go towards compensating their student athletes and their players. And so when you look at an athletic department in general, let's say that's $100 million in revenue, you're now talking about 20% of that athletic department's revenue could go towards paying players. And that's a seismic shift in how you got to think about things, because you either have to expand the pie and have sort of more money to be able to deal with that 20 million plus all of your other operating costs, or you have to sort of reduce the slices out of the pie. You got to take stuff out, right? You got to take out different overhead, maybe even different Olympic sports, other things. So it's a seismic shift. And I think UCLA, by having a chief revenue officer, is acknowledging that we want to make this pie bigger. Let's tap into the sponsorships. Let's tap into some resources, perhaps some private equity, other non-traditional business relationships to be able to make that pie bigger. So really great day overall for UCLA. And I think the dividends of this will pay off in the years to come.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think just having a strategy, because if you want your money to go strictly to football now, you have that option to do so. I think a lot of people, were donating to Men of Westwood after the chip firing, or trying to find a new coach, trying to get somebody in there. And necessarily it didn't go directly to football. So having this kind of funnel where you can put your money right where you want it to be, going to the football program, I think that's such an advantage for the football fans, the people that show up to the Rose Bowl week in and week out supporting this football team moving forward. So I really like that. Also love the name change, man. Sean Parker came in from the social network saying, drop the men, put the champion of Westwood right there. Just sounds better, sounds cleaner. UCLA is a school of champions. I like the title of the name. A lot of great stuff going on there, man. And like you said, $1 million already raised. Granted, that's 1/20th of Ohio State's NIL right now, but it's
better
point.
than 0/20th, Will.
Yeah,
let me tell you, it's infinitely better than 0/20th.
Yeah.
So
yeah, $1 million's a great starting place
Absolutely.
to be at, especially 3 or 4 days, as it has opened up. So we will take that. Guys, continue to donate if you want to see change at UCLA. You finally have a place where you can funnel it directly to the football program. So check that out. We're going to talk about basketball, guys. I'm going to save that for the end of the podcast. Very, very pumped to talk hoops. I've got some comps for these players. I've got some, lineups that I particularly like with this unit. But let's get to the football program, man. UCLA will be taking on Rutgers on Saturday in a conference game as they travel out to New Jersey. I mean, that just sounds so insane for somebody within the Pac-12 conference. Somebody from LA is going to Piscataway in New Jersey right there. Rutgers, they're 4-2 right now as it stands. They've got wins over Washington and Virginia Tech. They've lost the last 2 games. Lost to a Nebraska team we're going to see in a week or two after this. Lost to Wisconsin. They got boat raced by Wisconsin. No nice way to say that. A 42-7 deficit. This team, Madman, it's eerily similar to what I saw last week with Minnesota in a lot of ways. You look at the offense, 83rd in total offense, nothing totally special there. 74th in total defense. The one area where I think, UCLA can have a shot in this game is if they continue to do really well on the run defensive side of the football. And granted, Kyle Monungai led the conference in rushing yards last year. We're 13th in the nation now in rushing yards per game allowed. So there's an advantage there. And where I think this might benefit us moving forward, for as bad as the Minnesota quarterback was last week, man, Athan Kaliak-Manis might be worse than the guy that we just saw in Max Crosby. Like this guy, for the last 3 games, I mean, he's gone sub 200 yards passing in games. They needed him to step up and win. They lost 42-7. When you're not throwing the ball over 200 yards, being down that much, you're just not very good at quarterback. I don't know how a nice way to phrase that would be. They're very good against the pass. They're top 30 once again in that area, but they struggle like UCLA in terms of getting to the quarterback. So if UCLA's offensive line is going to have an advantage at some point in the game, some point in the season, this might be the opponent you want to see. Greg Schiano, obviously a very good coach. Where do we lie on this, man? Because we got so close against Minnesota last week. Bowl game's kind of out of the picture at this point, in my opinion. Can they rally and get their second win of the season against a team that, in a lot of ways, I feel like is just as beatable, if not more, than Minnesota?
No, Will, and you laid it out so well in terms of just, kind of the overall positional rankings and where they come in. Will, this is an interesting team, and I think you said it really well at 4-2. Which Rutgers team is going to show up on Saturday? Is it the team that beat Washington, which is an impressive victory considering Washington beat Michigan, right? I mean, so, there's a version of Rutgers that is very physical, plays really good defense, going to slow the tempo, take a game into the fourth quarter, and then win with really good coaching and discipline? Or is this the version of Rutgers against Nebraska and more notably against Wisconsin, where over the past 2 weeks, Will, they've scored 14 total points, making UCLA's 15 points per game seem like the greatest show on turf, and so that's really, I think, the question that we have here is against Nebraska. I thought their defense played really well, kept them in that game. They were just so anemic offensively that it was just hard to sort of do anything. And I think Nebraska got very conservative over the course of that game as well. And they said, look, the worst thing we can do is kind of turn the ball over and give this team short fields. We're up 14-0. I mean, we're very content kind of punting the ball and making them go long fields. And that's something that obviously UCLA fans would have loved, I think, a little bit more of last week against Minnesota, given what short fields we gave them with the penalties. So Nebraska almost took the air out of the ball, given how anemic Rutgers was offensively. And then Wisconsin kind of opened it up. And really, you saw everything that was sort of capable. And the fact that Rutgers lost that game at home by 5 touchdowns, Will, is very alarming. So this is a middle-of-the-pack, very mediocre team overall. And I think this is a very gettable game for UCLA. To me, Will, I think it comes down to a couple of key matchups. You laid it out really well. One is that UCLA front seven against Manangai, because he is absolutely phenomenal. 739 yards rushing, Will, 5.5 yards per carry, over the course of 6 games. I mean, he's getting you 120 plus yards per game. So everything is sort of predicated off of Manangai sort of being able to run the ball. And then nothing better for a struggling quarterback than being able to kind of get some easy play action passes to just be able to complete some balls and move the ball down the field. So how does UCLA, who I thought their run defense was phenomenal last week against Minnesota, holding them to just 41 yards rushing, how do they sort of stack the box? We want to see more of Femi. Obviously, Toia is a monster with the double and triple teams. Schlesinger. Is Medrano going to go side to side and then Schlesinger, right? I mean, that's kind of the 4-headed monster here. Can they do their thing and bottle Rutgers up in a significant way? The other kind of matchup, Will, that I'm looking for is Daimir Miller, who's Rutgers' number 1 receiver. He's only at 216 yards receiving, Will, this season over the course of 6 games. So you're saying, well, what's the big deal there? Will, he had almost 1,300 yards receiving last year, and it speaks to kind of the lack of quarterback play. Daimir Miller, in a lot of ways, is Rutgers' J. Michael Sturdivant, a very talented player who's just not getting the opportunities through a combination of lack of offensive line production and really good quarterback play. Can Rutgers get a little bit creative and get Daimir Miller the ball? And could this be potentially his breakout game? Are there things they can do with him in the bubble screen game? Are there things they can do with him in terms of reverses? Are there things they can do to get him the ball to perhaps even open up the field so the defense isn't so tightly focused on Manangai? That's number 2. And then, Will, I think you said it, number 3, the fact that Rutgers is a below average defensive front from a pass rush perspective. I think they're really good when it comes to gap integrity. I think they're really good in terms of not like shooting themselves in the foot, but they lack that sort of next level athleticism, that ranginess to be able to make big explosive plays. This is the week, Will, for this offensive line to at least have a draw. Perhaps asking a positional win from that group right now may be too much, but this is the week where you can get a draw. And if you can get a draw, does that finally open things up for the run game? And more importantly, does that give Ethan Garber some time to perhaps get a 300-yard passing game, given all of those weapons? So I'm looking for the amount of time that Garbers has and what he's going to do with that time. The Manangai defensive front 7 matchup, and then does Rutgers get Daimir Miller the ball in some unique ways? Those are the 3 things I'm looking at. But, Will, I'm really liking where the Bruins are right now. This is a game that's very gettable. I expect this to be low scoring because of both offenses. I think we're looking at kind of a 13-10, 16-10 type of game. It's going to be a game that's going to go into the fourth quarter. And I think the team that can avoid the big mistakes is going to be the team that comes out, whether that's turnovers, interceptions, fumbles, big sacks, critical penalties. because I think scoring opportunities are probably going to be a little bit fewer and further between, just given where these offenses are. So you really want to take advantage when you do get those opportunities. But this is an absolutely winnable game, Will. That's why we were so excited about getting through that gauntlet to 1-4. That's why last week against Minnesota was so crushing, because it was a gettable game. This is another gettable game. And again, Will, we're going on a bye after this game. Can you imagine getting a nice win, then going on a bye, resting up, and with an opportunity to make kind of a second half run? This could be really a nice opportunity for UCLA to get to 2-5.
Yeah, it's a really interesting matchup because one team struggles passing the ball and one team struggles rushing the ball. And if UCLA was to gain any semblance of confidence for this offensive line, especially with that bye week, just at least having that tangible, hey, we played really well last week. Let's build that to the second half of the season. This is the game you got to do it, man. Because Rutgers, they're physical. We know what a Greg Schiano coach team does. I mean, this guy was the Ohio State defensive coordinator with Urban Meyer, the Bosa brothers, Chase Young, these type of players. But this team doesn't have those type of players. So if you're going to try to build that confidence, God, this is the weak offensive line. I know the whole UCLA fan base is going, hey, man, we need it this week. Get out there and make some plays. So UCLA offensive line, this is your shot, man. This is your chance to make a big-time statement. Let's pivot, man. I'm really excited about this. Basketball season is here in Westwood, and the expectations are very, very high for UCLA. And everything that Mick Cronin has built, I think people know us as a football network, and you and I are known as the people that cover the football program. But the ironic part of this piece is my media before this was basketball. I worked as a play-by-play broadcaster for the University of Memphis Tigers with Penny Hardaway. I know college basketball. I worked in the NBA with the Memphis Grizzlies. Basketball is my favorite sport. We talk about it off air. It's one of our favorite things to talk about. I know you're a diehard hoops fan. And growing up in LA with no professional team, in the NFL for most of your life, I know you're a basketball guy. You're totally. UCLA, you're Lakers. That's what it is, man.
No doubt.
For us, this is almost too easy of a transition to move to basketball. And I just want to say how excited we are to be able to cover this, man. So give me your initial thoughts on, us just breaking into basketball, because I think this is going to really have a huge impact on our weekly lives. We're going to have 3 or 4 games to cover throughout this week. We're going to try to go post-game lives on a lot of these games. But, dude, it's just an exciting time, not only for the podcast, but more importantly, the program of UCLA moving forward.
Yeah, no, Will, it's it's a seamless transition, as you said. And I just want to sort of couch it with our viewers and listeners, is that we're going to do both now. It's not an or, it's an and. And we're sort of taking football and we're building into basketball, because the overall LA Football Network, if you guys go to our website and go to our platform, you're noticing we're starting to branch out in the other LA sports. You're seeing Dodgers content there. You're seeing Lakers content there. You're seeing Clippers content there, and so on and so forth. So we're expanding out to really capture all of LA sports in a significant way. And so it just made all the sense in the world for Will and I to go to basketball. Obviously, I don't have the individual experiences, Will, in terms of sports media, but what I do have is a profound and deep love for UCLA basketball growing up. I mean, I grew up going to UCLA basketball camp my whole life and playing at Pauley Pavilion as a kid who was 12, 13, 14 years old. And just, my love for basketball really came on the courts of Pauley Pavilion on that UCLA campus. The 95 UCLA championship team is still my favorite sports team ever. The Tyus Edney second round layup, and just, the O'Bannon brothers, and, Toby Bailey and George Zedek, and, J.R. Henderson, and on the list it went. Cameron Dollar. I mean, I grew up on that team. That was the team that I fell in love with when it came to college basketball. So I've been a diehard UCLA basketball fan my whole life. And so I don't think anyone is better positioned to really get deep and get analytical and get passionate about UCLA basketball than Will and myself. And let's be honest, we love football. We'll do an amazing thing. But when you close your eyes and you think about the history of UCLA sports, you think of the Wizard of Westwood, you think of what that era meant when it came to the likes of Kareem and Bill Walton and Gail Goodrich and others. And this is the place that has the most national championships in basketball, no question about it. And when you look at the plethora of NBA players, to me, even in this sort of modern era, obviously we had that Cinderella magical run in 21. the 22 team for my money was right there with UConn as the national championship co-favorites. Obviously, we had some unluck there, some bad luck with the Bona and the Clark injuries. And then you go all the way back to the 3 straight Final Fours with Kevin Love and Aflalo and Jordan Farmar and Westbrook. And that whole team, Lorenzo Mata and Aboya and all those guys. So and Bamute, and so you really sort of have an incredible pedigree here, and I see UCLA moving forward where it's kind of Duke, Kentucky, UCLA in terms of just the NIL and the opportunities for growth here as what the 3 powers are going to be moving forward. Obviously, UConn's at the top of the sport right now, but just I think overall sustaining power. I think this is a special time with UCLA and just the ilk of UCLA. You got the statue of Coach Wooden right in the center of campus. Pauley Pavilion's right in the center of campus. We don't have to worry about 26.3 miles, traveling anywhere when it comes to basketball. I live a few blocks from UCLA's campus, so it's going to be a ton of fun for Will and I to be able to do this in a very immersive way. So thrilled, Will, and this feels like kind of day one of I know we dabbled a little bit last year in basketball, and we were kind of piloting and exploring of what that looked like. But this is going to be kind of a full-on adventure into basketball, and can't wait.
Cannot wait, man. And, when diving into this roster, we knew we had one of the top, if not the top, transfer portal classes coming to UCLA this year. We knew we had our top 2 leading scorers from last year returning. And we knew we had an All-American in Trent Perry coming at the last second for UCLA, who's been raved about, which I am very, very excited to get into. But the guy I want to start with, man, the most unlikely transfer of them all, if you want to break them down, Kobe Johnson coming to Westwood. And there's just certain players and style that fit with coaches and things like that. Like with the Spurs system, you're getting like a Bruce Brown, scrappy type of player. I feel the same way about Mick Cronin and Kobe Johnson, man. Mick Cronin, famously from the Bob Huggins tree, who was known for years as one of the toughest defensive-minded coaches within the sport. Mick Cronin has very much established that footprint himself. Jalen Clark was one of the best defenders, if not the best, in all of college basketball a few years ago. You get Kobe Johnson, and the piece from Ben Bolch, where Lazar Stefanovic, and we'll get into him too, he texts Coach immediately, a guy that's likely going to be taking his starting spot to start the year, saying, Coach, that is a great pickup. I'm so fired up we can get this guy in. Because you watch the highlight tape of what this guy meant to – he's probably the only positive from that USC team last year that was so incredibly hyped with Collier, Bronny James, these types of players. Kobe Johnson is a defensive stalwart. And just for the match of coach and player, it just seems like peanut butter and jelly, man. Like, it is going to be a beautiful combination. We've seen all the quotes, from – preseason camp. The famous one, Ben Bolch was saying this, Mick Cronin mic'd up at practice. It's why Kobe steals the ball from you guys like your little kids. That was what Mick was saying to the team out there. Kobe Johnson's the natural place to start. And to the viewers and listeners, I'm a big comps guy because I love the style of basketball and how it's played. The guy that comes to mind for me when I think of a Kobe Johnson, Matisse Thybulle a couple years ago, just a dog defender, high motor, never gets tired. And Isaac Okoro, who led, Auburn to that Final Four, very solid player within the NBA right now. Those are the 2 guys when I watch Kobe Johnson highlights, he just screams to me, athletic, 2-way player in his future. Could be a lottery pick if he puts all the tools together, man. Talk to me about Kobe Johnson, a guy that should be on the unanimous first team All Big Ten, even though he's not.
Yeah, Will. I mean, it's so ironic about Kobe Johnson. And this is sort of where I think the karma, sort of works itself out sometimes, even with the rivalry, right? I mean, just sort of segueing to football for a second. I mean, we talked about Kamari Ramsey and Danton Lynn and all these folks kind of going from UCLA to USC. Well, in basketball, it kind of it's the other traffic is in the other direction. It's like driving in Europe, right? It's the different lane. It's the opposite direction where the traffic is headed. Will, I absolutely love Kobe Johnson. Ironically enough, I was at the game, courtside for the USC UCLA game, the basketball game last year at Pauley. Very feisty game, and there are probably 11 USC fans in the whole stadium in Pauley Pavilion, the fans did such an outstanding job. Student section, I mean, kind of gave SC the business the whole night. And Kobe Johnson was one of these guys that just kept competing for all 40 minutes. And he hit the big shots at the end of that game. And he made the big stops at the end of that game. And I remember he hit the big shot and he sort of turned to the crowd and he sort of taunted the crowd. And he actually did fours down with both hands, Will. And I was like, I'm like, man,
how's this guy a Bruin now?
This guy's a Bruin now. Yeah, I mean, the last guy in the world that you thought was going to be a Bruin, but you walked away saying, man, what a competitor. What an incredible player. But my God, you did fours down. I hate that guy. That's how you're sort of thinking of it in terms of from a fan perspective. But to have him now come to UCLA, Will, I think it's sort of the engine of everything that Mick Cronin wants to do. I think that Clark, from a slot position, he's kind of he's this year's Clark, right? It's that two-way player. He's going to take the number one player on the opposing team, and he's going to try and take them out of the game. And his base is just so significant. He moves side to side effortlessly. He's built like a prototypical two guard. And I just love everything about him. He rebounds really well at 6'6". He runs the floor really well. Underrated shooter. Will, I'll be honest with you. I also think that we haven't really seen the totality of his offensive game because he's a guy, he's got some hops, he's got some bounce, he's got some handle. This is somebody that if he sort of puts it all together, I think he's more than just potentially a kind of a defensive stopper, two-way player. The UCLA comp kind of historically, Will, that he sort of reminds me of, he's got to grow into it a little bit offensively, but it's all the tools are there. And I think last year at SC, just quite frankly, that was such a poorly coached team and they had no chemistry that I think it was really hard for him to kind of get any sort of flow. He actually reminds me of a Flalo. I mean, when you look at the base and you look at the size and you look at the defensive tenacity, Kobe Johnson reminds me a lot of Aaron Aflalo. And I think that offensive game, I think he's going to surprise a lot of people. This guy is going to be the emotional leader, the spiritual leader. He's going to be the motor of this team. And I think he's going to be everything that Mick Cronin wants him to be. And regardless of who else is going to be in the starting five, I think he's in pole position to be in one of those spots, no question about it. And I think just the domino effect, Will, of having a Stefanovic kind of come off the bench and just be a shooter and not have to worry about playmaking and doing all these things, and he can just kind of be a knockdown shooter. I think the Kobe Johnson effect is going to have sort of a lot of ripple effects over the course of this season. Really excited about him. And when you talk about the Big Ten, we talk so much about football, but basketball is also a more half-court physical game in the Big Ten. This is going to be the perfect player for that system. Cannot wait to see Kobe Johnson in uniform when the games matter.
Yeah, and he kind of gives me some Matt Barnes vibes, too.
Yeah.
Just long, athletic wing,
totally.
Gets in your grill, not afraid to talk some shit out there, as you mentioned with the fours down. I think people forget because Matt Barnes is an analyst now. He's on a very pro-weed podcast right now within the NBA. But that dude was a dog, man. He earned everything he got on the basketball court. And it was a lights-out defender for my, We Believe Warriors team that I watched so closely. So he's got a lot of Matt Barnes in him. He's got a lot of a follow in him. I think a lot of UCLA alums are going to see Kobe Johnson, ironically, as a former Trojan, and be like, this is an old school throwback type of player that we can all hang our hat on. So that's the first guy I want to talk about. The guy who I think is going to lead the team in scoring this year, it's not Dylan Andrews. It's not Sky Clark. Tyler Bilodeau. Oh, my goodness, man. 6'9". He has so many bags of tricks within his post game. Very good shooter. Just the post-up game, he could take it from three. He's around 36% from three last year as a guy that stands 6'9", 6'10". Just so offensively skilled. And John Rothstein agreed with this, the famous college basketball analyst. He goes, Kobe Johnson, leader of the team, most complete player. But if you're just going on the offensive side of the ball, Bilodeau from Oregon State, there's something there. 14 points a game last year at Oregon State. I just think the offense should run through this guy as a point forward and what he can potentially do as a big passing, the basketball out of double teams, shooting the basketball, different scenarios like that. And the comp I got for you, man, Ryan Anderson, long-time player with the NBA.
I like it.
Cal, he won Pac-12 Player of the Year, played 12 years in the NBA. I just think when I watch Bilodeau and what he could potentially become as an offensive player, I don't know if the defense will ever be high level enough, even though he's going to a Mick Cronin-like system. I think this guy could be a end of the first round draft pick, and we'll get some serious minutes on an NBA roster if he continues to build this offensive game. What do you think about Bilodeau coming in, who I think is a guaranteed day one starter for UCLA if he's healthy?
Yeah, well, you know what I love about Bilodeau, where I think the team certainly struggled last year, and where there was oftentimes there were some scoring droughts even on that 23 team, Will, that we think so highly of. Obviously, Jaquez was on that team and so forth, but they struggled a little bit in the post. And last year in particular, obviously we love Bona. I'm rooting for Bona's success with the Sixers. Hope he has a long, illustrious career. What a great body. What a great athleticism. But Bona always struggled kind of in the post. You couldn't just sort of dump it down. And, he was always sort of looking for that pass back out to the perimeter. He didn't really have a post game. Wasn't very comfortable with his back to his basket. Wasn't really comfortable as sort of a true dribble. Couldn't really go off of either shoulder. There was no jump hook there. It was all very raw, with Bona. With Bilodeau, he was basically the face of Oregon State last year. He had to carry that team as a primary scorer. And I just think, his combination of outside inside is so significant. And I think that there's going to be so much defense on this team on the other four positions that you're going to be okay with him defensively. I actually think what Mick is trying to do, Will, and you'll love this, but I think they're getting into that world of like the Warriors' death lineup. I think what they really want to do is they want to be able to switch everything defensively, and they don't want the offense to kind of get stagnated in the post. And Bilodeau's a guy you can sort of pull him out. You can go high pick and roll. You can go pick and pop. He's a spacer. And so, but if you need him to sort of go down and post up a little bit and initiate the offense, that way he can as well. So I think that versatility is absolutely paramount. I think he's going to play that role. Very different style of player. But if you recall, Will, I mean, that's kind of how we used Jaquez, a couple of years ago, where it was like we even slid Jaquez down in the post. We had him at the top of the key, sometimes even initiating the offense with 12, 10 seconds on the shot clock. He's going to slot into that kind of primary offensive role for this Mick Cronin offense. And I just love what Bilodeau brings because you have that versatility offensively. You can do so many things with him. The ball's not going to get stuck. I think the big takeaway with this team so far is there's no ball stoppers. In years past, you still had some ball stoppers on this team, both on the perimeter as well as on the inside. I mean, Bona, Nuba, even on the perimeter, sometimes Andrews early in his career was kind of a ball stopper. Stefanovic was definitely a ball stopper most points in the season. This year's team, the ball is going to get out quickly because you're going to have a lot of skilled players. And Bilodeau's that unique player in the middle, the ideal sort of modern big, Will. 6'9", can shoot the three, like you said, play inside. You can switch everything offensively. You can switch everything defensively. Exactly.
He's got every bag of tricks on offense you could ever want from a skilled big like that. It's such a difference from Bona, who I think was a fantastic defensive big within the system. There's a reason he got drafted in the NBA. But, unless if it was right under the basket for Bona,
it wasn't going to happen.
You really do offensively with him. Whether it's Bilodeau, he might be the key that unlocks this entire offense where he's catching the ball at the top of the key and, Andrews or Perry is cutting back door to the rim. There's an easy play for them to lay it up and in, and it just kind of gets everyone involved and allows people to truly operate in the sense of space, as you nailed it, that allows UCLA's offense to reach its ceiling when it comes to the modern era of basketball as a whole. You know what I mean? So Tyler Bilodeau, I think, is a big one for me right there. Other guys I want to talk about, man. Sky Clark, obviously a big name coming in. Very explosive scorer, was once a 5-star recruit, had committed to Kentucky, went to Illinois, then went to Louisville. I think he's really talented. A lot of Cam Thomas vibes from me, from LSU. Nets can fill it up. I think this might be my hottest take, and I know how Andrews finished the year last year. He was very talented, very good player. But Madman, I think this team is so deep where I think there's a scenario where Dylan Andrews starts the year as a starter, but with Trent Perry kind of breathing down his neck. And we got to be honest, Stefanovic is one of the only seniors on this team, right? He shot 39%. I think, he was very inconsistent to start the year, but with Andrews, he was one of the more consistent players down the stretch for UCLA that allowed them to get to the second round of the Pac-12 tournament. 39% from three. You might need that, but hey, you got Dominic Harris coming there. He's at 44%. He was third in the entire country with the three ball. I guess what I would ask you right now is, with 6 new transfers, 3 new freshmen coming in, what is your ideal lineup when it comes to UCLA, when it comes from 1 to 5? Because I think we have to throw out any mocks that we may have, because this team is going to figure itself out. In the earliest parts of January, in my opinion, we're going to see the finished product.
Yeah, well, it's sort of the $1 million question, if you will, of what is this starting 5 going to look like, because they are absolutely so deep. The one thing I'll say, Will, is it's been interesting to see Andrews over the course of the summer and the offseason. He's really been focused on his 3 ball. And, that was something that I think he understands. And it's sort of back to this idea, the ball's not going to stick. It's going to be death lineup. You're going to have a threat on all levels of the court. And Andrews was phenomenal. But our best offense last year was sort of Andrews and high pick and roll, kind of getting to that 17-foot, by the elbow mid-range. And he did a fantastic job there. It took a while to get there because Stefanovic was also kind of playing some point at times. He was also sort of a pure
two. Have a true point guard
and you didn't have a true point guard. And Stefanovic was kind of playing more in that 2-guard role as a starter. And if you recall, Will, what we said was, we love Andrews, we love Stefanovic, but on a championship team, Andrews is probably like your 7th man and Stefanovic is probably your 8th man. And that's kind of where we're going to be this year. I think you're going to start with Andrews. And I think if Andrews has made that jump, both in terms of handle as well as 3 ball, then obviously there's a lot of opportunity there for him. But I think we're getting to a world where it's going to be Perry and Clark and Kobe Johnson in this sort of 3-headed guard type of situation. I think Bilodeau is going to be your big. And then the question for Mick is, well, do you want a 4th shooter out there, or do you want a little bit of size? And I think that's where, I think there's going to be some conversation. But that's where the variation is going to be. And I think that's what makes this team very unique. If you're going up against a bigger team, then you're going to probably put some size next to Bilodeau. If you're going up against a more explosive team, then you're going to put a shooter, after those 3 guys. So I think they're going to be able to mix it and match it. I think this is also going to need to be a year where Mick Cronin grows as a coach. And I know that's something that, a lot of UCLA fans, that may be a sensitive topic for a variety of reasons, but Mick has also had a lot of talent in years past, and one of the critiques of him is that he underutilizes the degree of his bench. This is going to have to be a year where I don't think he can have just a fixed mindset of saying, hey, these are my 5, and this is what I'm going to roll with. I think he really needs to look at saying, hey, there's probably 1 or 2 slots in this starting 5 that I feel really good about and I feel really strongly about, and I think the other 3 spots are sort of open for discussion. And I think he's going to need to use that early part of the season to figure that out a little bit. So I'm expecting Mick to have a little bit more of an open mind here. But if I had to sort of look at it right now, Will, I think Clark and Perry are going to be your backcourt. Obviously, Kobe's going to be your stopper there. And so you got this kind of 3-guard lineup. Bilodeau is going to be sort of your primary down-low scorer. And now who's going to be your 5th starter? Are you going to go with the shooter? Are you going to maybe go with a little bit of size? That's, to me, is going to be the question. But I think it's going to see how it all plays out. But you got to start with Andrews just from an incumbency standpoint and then go from there.
Yeah. And I want to give credit to Dylan Andrews. He finished the year a lot stronger than I would have anticipated he would. And I know he's working on the shot. But that team, frankly, wasn't very talented last year, if we're being honest with ourselves. You know what I mean? So I think you nailed it with Andrews. Essentially, he's working on the 3 ball, 32% last year. He obviously wants to take his game to the next level. That's something you're going to have to do if you want to play in the pros. But hear me out on this. I think long-term, this is just projecting towards the NCAA tournament. There's a world where Stefanovic is actually more likely to start for them. Over Andrews.
Because he's a knockdown shooter. Yep, exactly.
Not only he was second on the team in rebounds last year. He's 6'7". He provides length, whereas Andrews is only 6'2". You can really throw out some incredible lineups. And we haven't even talked about William Kyle, who's Summit Defensive Player of the Year last year, coming from South Dakota State. We haven't talked about the most underrated transfer we've gotten, in Eric Daly Jr., who played in, maybe a tougher conference in the
Yes.
Big 12 with Kansas and Baylor and these types of programs. Eric Daly was a starter for Oklahoma State last year at
Yes.
6'8", 230. From a physicality, it's almost an embarrassment of riches.
No, it's ridiculous, Will. It's absolutely ridiculous. And that's the thing. I mean, do you go Daly and bill it out down low, and then you got your 3-guard lineup? Do you go, does Stefanovic become your 4th starter, and then you spread it out? Because I to your point, Will, I love Stefanovic. If Stefanovic just has to be a catch and shoot guy, and where he can kind of set his base, he's a knockdown shooter. I mean, he's going to be high 30s, low 40s, no question about it. And then you throw in, as you said, the 6'7" frame. He got into it. I mean, he mixed it up. He was a great defensive player. He crashed the boards. You got to love all of that. So it's just going to be so fascinating here, Will. This is a Final Four caliber team. This is a team with national championship aspirations. I think the only question here is going to be, what is the right lineup when, and knock on wood that this team stays healthy. But if those two things kind of click the way we expect them to, this team is going to be playing late into March and perhaps even April 4th for all the marbles.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned Ade Mara, who's going to be in year 2. I think he might be due for a redshirt year. I just don't he's very raw still, in my opinion. Well, the talent could be there. I think he's going to be 2 or 3 years. You're going to kind of see the fruits of his labor.
Will, it's a really interesting point. I mean, I think with Mara, this also may be kind of a make it or break it year in sort of a Mick Cronin program as well. We love him. I mean, he's such a great kid, great ambassador at UCLA. We want him on the team. But when you think about his size and when you think about what he's going to grow into, both physically, but also from a skill set standpoint, you got to kind of ask, I mean, does that fit with sort of Mick, that there's going to be an interesting conversation there. So Mara is somebody, I agree with you. I think he's someone who's going to be a big body that can come in, provide some rebounding, provide some minutes. But we were asking him to be the starting center last year, and that's just not who he was at that particular point in time. That's also the other thing, Will, is I also hope that Mick, you're not, this isn't a soup kitchen. You got to win a national championship. This is UCLA. These are the expectations. But I also hope that he sort of rewards the kids that have sort of stuck it out and had to play sort of out of position, out of role. I mean, we're talking about Stefanovic at point. We're talking about Mara as the starting center. A lot of guys that had to kind of go above and beyond what they needed to do last year. So I think Mick is going to sort of reward that with some rotational minutes with this team. But like we said, Will, I mean, on a championship team, Andrews is the 7th man. Stefanovic is 8th man on a championship team. And that's sort of where they're slotting right now once the cream rises to the top, which tells you what the expectations of this team are.
Yeah, man. I might be higher on Stefanovic. I know he really struggled at the beginning of last year, but I just think from the returning talent, if you were asking me, what guy can directly make an impact, reading the article that Bolts just posted with the leadership he's had.
Yeah.
He said he's been the unquestioned leader in the offseason, whether it's been his shooting, his rebounding, his size. I mean, think about this line. The combinations of lineups you could throw out with this roster is just absurd on somebody. You're playing a different big. You could throw Mara out there. You want to get a physical, lengthy lineup. I mean, we're talking Stefanovic, Daly, Kobe Johnson, Bilodeau. I mean, Sky Clark and Dylan Andrews are 2 very, very similar players. So I'm kind of monitoring that situation where they might be fighting for each other's jobs throughout the season. Where I think, and it's rare for Mick to really play a true freshman to the level he should have played. I know a lot of people were frustrated with Amari Bailey's playing time a couple of years
ago. And Peyton Watson's.
Yeah, and Peyton Watson. So, I mean, if Trent Perry really is all that, I mean, we were hearing the most absurd rumors about this kid, like the hardest working kid in there, first to arrive to practice, last to leave. He's coming off being a McDonald's All-American. He's getting the praise. If Trent Perry's really as good as we're hearing,
I think Trent Perry has all the tools, Will, to start. Now, I know a lot of people will say, whoa, this is, that's not going to be Mick. And Mick might be a little bit more conservative, and Go would say is Stefanovic to start. But I think there's a world here. I mean, I think when we start getting into February and March, I really think in the end, the 3-guard lineup that's going to give UCLA the best chance to win in March when you need exceptional guard play and explosive guard play, I think is going to be Clark, Perry, and Kobe Johnson. And I think Stefanovic is going to be sort of lurking, to your point, as a big part of the team. And I love Stefanovic, love the leadership, but you can be a leader as the sixth man of the team. Like you don't have to start to be the leader of the team. But it's going to be fascinating to see, Will. The thing that I love about those guys is they can kind of do it all. They can shoot. They got the handle. They can move around. Stefanovic is still a little bit static. He's still kind of the best form of Stefanovic is still sort of catch and shoot, and you're going to need that in a game in March. You're going to need that absolutely. But I just love the versatility of the other three guys. You can just sort of throw anything at their way, and you're going to be in a good spot.
Totally. And I think I was, framing it from the standpoint of like, if I had to rely on one player to be that biggest impact come March time, come big game scenario, I'm putting my money on Stefanovic because he does a lot of little things that, really get him out there.
He's kind of like, Will, and, we're sort of making comps to other players, and we're kind of making comps to like the 23 year and the 21 year. In a sense, in terms of those intangibles and being able to hit big shots in big moments, particularly in that, the Final Four run and beyond, he kind of was like Singleton. He's going to be kind of that Singleton for this particular group in terms of being able to hit those timely threes, providing kind of stability in a game when, maybe it's a game of runs and UCLA is not throwing their fastball, turning the ball over. It comes in and really sort of fortifies things. So I'm really excited to see Stefanovic in this new ecosystem for sure.
And I think a reason why I'm so high on him is when I watch his game, and it's obviously not the same type of guy at the same level, but just what I've seen from a college level perspective, there's some Klay Thompson stuff going on there. You know what I mean?
That's high praise.
Yeah, it's a poor man's, Klay Thompson in a lot of regards, but same size, similar shooters. I think defensively, I think Klay had a little bit more to offer, but when they're having a bad night, the emotions kind of get a little crazy with them. Stefanovic, there's a lot of Klay-ish stuff there.
Wow, I love it. Wow,
it's a lot of elements.
Lazar in Indian culture, Will, he's gonna be getting the hiccups tonight, because we're talking about him so much, thinking about him so much. Lazar, Klay, Stefanovic. Oh my goodness, Big
time stuff. And we didn't even mention Dominic Harris, who was third in NCAA 3-point shooting percentage. So you got the shooting lineup to throw out when you're down like 6 points in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game. You got the big physical lineup you can throw out with Daly, Bilodeau, William Kyle. These type. It's an embarrassment of riches in Westwood. And to me, on paper, if everything goes well, anything less than a Final Four is a disappointment.
Totally.
To me, what I've seen. Let's transition to the Big Ten, man, because I want to talk about the conference a little bit. A preview on that. Purdue has been favored once again to be the preseason favorites. They've won it the last 2 years, famously getting to the national championship last year with Zach Edey, losing to UConn within the national championship. They return 3 starters from last year, Smith, Lawyer, and Kaufman-Renn, with Smith being actually the preseason favorite for Big Ten Player of the Year. They look really promising. You've got Illinois coming back, man, with what they've been able to do. They reached the Elite Eight last year. They lost to UConn. UConn just was beating everybody these past few years. Indiana, Mike Woodson, talk about a name I haven't thought about in a long time. Mike Woodson, former Knicks head coach, has been in Indiana for a while. They've had a lot of guys. So there's just a lot of stuff going on there. But yeah, it's just a lot of great stuff going on with what we've got right now. Do you think, outside of Purdue, is there a team in your mind that, come Big Ten play, you're kind of thinking, hey, man, this team's making me a little nervous season-wise? Yeah,
well, it's interesting. We got to kind of see it all sort of shake out a little bit, how Purdue sort of responds without Edey. The big question for Purdue was, were they going to have enough guard play? Were they going to have enough sort of wing play, to play off of Edey? And unfortunately, they just sort of ran into the buzzsaw that was UConn. But how are those guys going to be without the big man? And I think Purdue's going to take a step back. I think you got to love their sort of culture, what they've been able to build with Painter and everything that's there. But it's just so hard to replace an Edey at the college level. I think they're going to kind of come back to the pack. I think what's going to be interesting, Will, is to see how some of the traditional powers, the things that they have done in the transfer portal, the things that they've done through recruiting. I've got really my eye on Ohio State. I've got my eye on Indiana. And I've got my eye on Illinois. Those are kind of the 3 teams. A lot of noise has sort of been made through different acquisitions of talent. But I think that's going to be that's going to sort of make or break the depth of the conference. Is those three teams in particular, and then what does sort of Michigan look like in this post Juwan Howard era? Because obviously Michigan has been a perennial Sweet 16, Elite 8 team, made a number of Final Four runs. They got to retool their roster, new philosophy, of course. But I think I've really got my eye on Ohio State, Indiana, Illinois as where the contention is going to come from.
Yeah, and I know we'll just do a brief overview of the schedule we've got right now, and we'll do some more of the preview coming next week. Thank you guys for tuning in. This has been so much fun. The schedule when it comes to UCLA, man, early in the season, they've got a very strong out-of-conference schedule, when it comes to 3 top 10 opponents as it stands right now within the preseason rankings in Arizona, Gonzaga, and North Carolina. I think this is going to be a scenario where there is so much talent and you kind of have to figure it out. I mean, the famous kind of thinking point on this would be the Miami Heat teams with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, where it took them like a couple months to really kind of figure out the flow of things. There's so many new faces in this program, so many new, chemistry things that they have to learn out there on the basketball court. Madman, do you think this is crazy? I could see them going 1-2 in these 3 games and then really picking up steam towards the end of January and peaking come March. And that's when you need to be peaking in college basketball, as anyone knows. I mean, you look at that NC State team that, made the final. You look at that UCLA team a few years ago.
Totally.
Hawkes and Juzang, getting us to the Final Four, nearly beating Gonzaga. I just think that's more of the model I would favor as opposed to coming out and blowing doors. If that's what happens for UCLA to start the season, even better. You don't have that transition period. But I think it's going to take a little bit of time before they figure out, like you said, with Mick, who's his 5? Like, who is his 5 most reliable players with as deep as this roster is?
No, Will, I mean, I think you said it really well. And I think what's important that I'm excited about is that they've got these 3 marquee games. And you got to kind of use the non-conference as a barometer of where you are at the start of the season and then work towards that at the end of the season. So it's more about the barometer than the results. Sometimes we sort of get so carried away. Now, if they're 0-3 in those 3 games and lose every game by double digits, then there's some cause for concern. But I think to your point, even if they go 1-2 and all 3 games are wildly competitive, I think you're in a great spot moving forward. And I see your point because North Carolina is going to have some better chemistry than UCLA, just given the amount of returning production that they have. Gonzaga also, they've got kind of their glue guys that come back every year to provide stability. So you're going to be playing some more experienced teams, particularly with this brand new lineup. It's going to take a little while to figure out who's going to gel. But what I love is that there's 3 marquee games, Will, to be able to sort of assess where your program is going into Big Ten play. And the thing that I love more than anything is even though the transition to the Big Ten, the fact that we were able to preserve that Arizona rivalry and play them every year in the non-conference is so significant. Because it just that rivalry is just so testy, and just it's incredible. I mean, when you the USC UCLA rivalry is fun because of the sort of the crosstown nature. But when you talk about who is UCLA's true basketball rival, it's Arizona. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And so preserving that rivalry is going to be absolutely critical, and so happy that it's there. But these are the 3 ideal teams you want to go up against because you also want to go up against some teams that have some explosiveness to them. North Carolina, Gonzaga, Arizona, all the last couple of years are teams that are very comfortable winning games in the mid to high 80s. And I think that's the big question in this sort of Mick Cronin scheme and style is, look, we know he's going to want to grind the game down into the 60s. We know we want to be able to play on those terms. But to be a true championship team, you have to be able to win games in the low 60s. You got to be able to win games in the mid to upper 80s. These teams are going to test you in terms of sort of that defensive efficiency of getting those games in the 70s and 80s. So not only do I love the quantity of opponent, I love the style of the opponent to really test this Mick Cronin philosophy moving forward, which is why the hopes are so high this year.
So high. We're going to have more basketball coverage coming soon. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's already so much fun just to be breaking down the basketball team. I feel like this is more of a home for us. I love football, love it to death, but there's something about basketball with my past experience, your love of the game as well, that it just feels like home. So I'm very, very excited to be doing this. You guys have a great rest of your evening. Make sure to check out Champions of Westwood. 4's up, guys. I hope you got a good one.